going. Hello and welcome to today's session on COVID-19 vaccine patent rights versus public interest. It's the September 30th, 2022, and we don't have to describe what's happening all around us. India, today we crossed 6.2 million numbers in positive cases and almost reaching 100,000, in terms of death numbers. So we are second to US. Today, no country is safe and no one is spared. Perhaps the time has come for the world to unite and fight against this COVID-19. And of course, the countries have been fighting for the last 6 months together, but now the time has come when we are desperately looking for the cure, and the prevention of this disease is more important that we fight together. We are grateful to the doctors, medical professionals, and everybody who is fighting this battle at the front line. Thousands of our frontline workers have succumbed to this disease, and thousands of them are at risk in absence of a cure. So we are very desperate to find a cure in terms of vaccine or the medicine or whatever could help us. And our scientists and researchers have responded promptly and positively and giving everything what it takes to develop the required cure for this disease. Generally, where a vaccine takes years to develop before it's rolled out for public use. In this case, it has been done like within months. Of course, we haven't got a final one yet, but looking at the pace, how fast they are moving, there are many vaccines at the phase 3 of clinical trial, and we hope for a good news in months, if not weeks. Generally, to give an example, it takes, as an average, a vaccine takes about 10.7 years from preclinical to clinical 1, 2, 3, and then when it's made available. Chickenpox vaccine took 34 years before it is rolled out. A vaccine for HIV has taken 36 years, and yet we don't have one. So you can imagine how much time it takes to develop, but of course, full credit to our scientists, our pharmaceutical companies who have put in a lot of effort, in this regard to make this faster, and make it available to everybody. Today's discussion is about patent rights available to the pharma companies to reap the benefits of hard work and the investment they have put in and they continue to put in order to develop this cure, and versus public rights, that is access to life-saving drugs at affordable price. This is about what is right and what is ethical. My name is Santosh Vikram Singh. I am a partner with Mandal Associates, which is an Indian law firm. My practice area includes intellectual property, media, and sports law. I would also like to introduce my today's panelist. My first panelist is Dr. Anindya Sircar. Dr. Sircar, who himself, is a senior IP professional with 2 unique PhDs, is currently engaged in consulting and teaching activities. Dr. Sircar has been head of IP with two top companies in India, and also they happen to be a Bangalore based, that is Infosys Limited, where he headed the IP team division for over 5 years, and before that he was heading IP department at Biocan Group. Dr. Sircar has figured in Lex Witness Hall of Fame top 50 prominent players in India's leading sector in 2010, and IM Strategy 300, which is world's top leading IP strategies during 17 and 22, 3 years. Thank you very much for joining us, Dr. Sircar, today. My second panelist for today is Mr. Ephraim Heiliczer. Please excuse me for not being able to pronounce your surname. Ephraim is a senior associate in the IP and regulatory compliance group at Pearl Cohen, Pearl Cohen's Tel Aviv office. Pearl Cohen is one of the topmost firm, having multiple offices in US, Israel, and also in UK. Ephraim has a strong background in medical science and has been involved in numerous life sciences and medical devices cases related to IP. Ephraim has also been active in litigation cases involving drug releases profiles of pharmacokinetics, drug metabolism, anti-HIV agents, CNS drugs, and medical devices. Ephraim is here to provide US and Israeli perspective in today's discussion. Thank you, Ephraim, for joining us today.
Sure, great to be with you.
A quick note to everybody who has joined us today for this webinar. Please leave your questions in a Q&A section, which we would take it up post panel discussion, maybe last 10-15 minutes. So the idea is to finish this discussion in 40-45 minutes and post that, take up all the questions and see how quickly we can wrap this up. Okay, so with that, let's start today's discussion. So we have 5 topics to cover today. The first topic is the pandemic and its effect on the research activities. To start with, Dr. Sircar, looking at the pandemic effect, which has impacted every aspect of our lives. Today, nobody can say that I am not affected directly or indirectly. Even during February, March, where many countries had announced lockdown, but of course, the hospital research center were open; they were allowed to continue. Whereas some countries, they immediately after the brief lockdown, they allowed these R&D companies to start the operation. So my question to you: how has this lockdown and economic slowdown because of the lockdown has affected these R&D activities in the pharma sector, and whether the impact has already been seen or is it yet to come?
Well, thanks, Santosh, for your wonderful introduction, and welcome to all who have joined in for today's discussion. See, across the world, this coronavirus has sparkled a lot of uncertainties in an unparalleled magnitude. And there is a tremendous anxiety about health. Now, this crisis is like no other, this has led to a substantial uncertainty on the impact of people's life, their livelihoods. And by all means, this is truly a global crisis and no country is spared. If you look at the Indian economy, Indian economy is facing a COVID-related crisis today. But, it was also badly affected by a slowdown for, more than 1 year earlier. So for all of us, it's probably time that we all need to press our reset button and start thinking fresh. And the situation for R&D activities in the healthcare sector is not much different. And most of them have already pressed their respective reset buttons. See, the challenge is that for more research activities, R&D activities in the healthcare sector, work from home is not a feasible option. Okay, there are requirements of wet labs, experimental facilities, instrumentation needs, among many other things. The initial lockdown spared none. I mean, most of the industries, and healthcare was probably the one to first get back to track. And in the Indian market, you saw not only they got back to track, a lot of products which were COVID-related splurged the market. We started having a band of diagnostic kits, oximeters, air purifiers, UV sterilization boxes, and whatnot, even masks and other protective kits. So, and some of the organizations increased their focus on the drugs and vaccine in this area to combat, and also some related ailments. Companies like Zydus Cadila and Bharat Biotech, in collaboration with ICMR and National Institute of Virology, are working on their own vaccine, which are presently in different stages of clinical trial. Additionally, there are companies like Serum Institute or Dr. Reddy's in Hyderabad who have partnered with overseas firms and have initiated clinical trials with their partner molecule. So I think most of the activities in healthcare are back on track with time now. I should also mention, the startups in this healthcare sector, their research activities, it took a toll because there was a loss of time, but I think most of them are back on track, And if you ask me the impact would have been very transitional at that stage. And in the long term, I would see very much marginal impact on the research activities in the healthcare sector. But a company is not ruled only by the research activities. There are many other activities which totally come together to for the success and the revenue of the organization.
Sure. So definitely you're saying they are back on track, but definitely everybody has been affected to a certain extent. It depends who got lucky and who got affected badly. Coming to you, Ephraim, how has the Western countries, seen this lockdown and economic impact on mainly on the pharma sector, and what they are doing to catch up with that the time they lost?
Yeah, so I would say at the height of the lockdowns around the world in April, there were pauses in wide ranges of clinical trials. Generally, clinical trials for conditions with high severity, like oncological trials, were able to continue during the lockdown. Some severe CNS and cardiovascular conditions, clinical trials for them were also able to proceed. Trials for less severe conditions, such as GI or respiratory conditions, were almost universally very highly disrupted. Many were stopped. There was a dramatic fall in R&D activities to less than even 50% of capacity as researchers were unable to access their equipment. As Dr. Sircar mentioned, particularly in the pharma field, working remotely is not always an option, as they need a lab, they need a hospital. Many pharma companies have shifted their research activities to focus specifically on COVID, and hospitals, the sites of the clinical trials, are now in many places shifting all available resources to treat patients with COVID. Therefore, particularly during the spring and into the summer, the pharma sector was almost universally in damage control, trying to find ways to keep the R&D that they had, to postpone things, to find ways to be able to pick it up at a later date and wait until the pandemic subsided. Now that the pandemic, and also at the same time shifting their efforts to COVID research. Anything that continues and things have been starting to pick up again, particularly in places where COVID has been waning. So you'll see they're predicated on the fact that you have higher safety protocols for researchers or for patients to make sure that they are not infected with COVID. That's really the key in all of these things. So in areas where we see a waning of COVID, we have seen a pickup of activities under strict protocols. Some severe trials have continued and have continued through all the time, if it's oncology or things like that. And really everything depends on right now the situation, whether in the specific country you're talking about a place where COVID is surging or COVID is waning. Places where COVID is waning and time has passed on, more research activities and clinical trials have picked up. In other places, they're waiting for the wane to come.
Sure. Now, next topic is diagnostic.
I just wanted to add one more thing. Sorry about that. I missed. Sure. I think that the getting back, and because you also asked about getting back in the future. So in the future, if we're going to get back, it's going to have protocols. We're going to need to have a lot of agility in the trials with backups and things like that will allow us to move in a diversified manner. If one country has a lot of a surge in COVID, we can ramp up activity in another country where there's a waning COVID. If a country has a waning COVID, we'll ramp up there. We have to use things like telemedicine, direct-to-patient clinical supply of drugs, remote lab operation, AI models to inform research to allow for less person-to-person interaction. So all of these things are going to be key in the areas where we're seeing the wane, and we can have things start to pick up. Things won't get fully back to normal, of course, until we have a vaccine worldwide.
Sure. So next topic is that diagnostic treatment or vaccine, what's on priority for us or for the pharmaceutical companies or for all of us put together. So looking at there are three major components to handle this disease, or for that matter, any other disease. number one, detection, prevention, and cure. So which one comes first and which one comes later? It depends on, how do we handle that, how to prioritize things. So looking back around March, April, where the focus was kind of how to detect that, and almost every country was struggling to find a right kit for detection of this. So diagnostic was the most problem, and most of the countries were kind of really badly in short supply of these detection kits. Now at least we can say countries like India and some other countries, we don't have any such issue or scarcity, and we have enough number of detection kits, and of course the time taken to detect this virus. Earlier it used to take weeks. Now it has gone down to days, and in some cases even hours, if we go to the specific detection technique. So my question is for Dr. Sircar, and of course we will come to the vaccine and the medicine at the later point. To start with these diagnostic kits, which are the leading diagnostic kits available today in India and in other countries? And what are the different processes being used around the globe to diagnose the virus? And it has to be faster and more accurate, because if you don't detect on time, and it goes out of hand and it spreads so fast. And of course, where do they stand in terms of IP or patent front?
Well, diagnostic kits are mainly in three categories. This is even quite widely spoken in the media. There are three different categories. The first one is probably a genetic test, okay, which is the RT-PCR, reverse transcriptase polymerase chain reaction. It's a method which is used to find specific genetic material of the pathogen, in this case the virus. So you take a sample from the body and then look into whether the genetic materials of that sample is, of that pathogen, this virus is present. The second is the antigen test, which is also known as the rapid test, the rapid antigen detection test. In this case, you take a swab, a nasopharyngeal swab, which directly detects the presence or absence of the antigen in the patient body. Okay, now this is a very fast method. You get the results within half an hour, and these are mainly to detect whether the specific protein in the virus has given some immune response in the suspected patient. The third and the most important is the antibody test. These are based on basically ELISA methods, where the host response to this virus is taken after several days. To be most accurate, an antibody test or an ELISA test would be most accurate around 10 to 14 days post-infection. Now, this test also has a catch that it can detect the antibodies which the body has made in response to the infection, but it cannot distinguish between an active infection or a previous infection, an earlier infection. Okay, so there need to be a correlation between these tests. Now, if you look at this test, now globally, these are the three mechanisms which are being employed in a large extent. The US FDA have approved or given an emergency authorization to 21 different test kits. And out of that, 12 are which belongs to this antibody detection or the ELISA method. And basically, most of them detect the IgG or IgM rather than the total antibody. In our country also, ICMR, Indian Council of Medical Research, has come out with recommendation and guidelines for these assay methods to detect. They have issued something which was called a standard Q antigen detection assay method, and which are being recommended to be used. And there are quite a few amount of such kits easily available in the market. Now, when you come to patents, this is very, very, very exciting to me, because the basic principles, the basic methods based on which these kits are made are pretty old. Okay, the PCR was invented and patented by Carey Millis many years ago. In fact, about a year back, Professor Miller's passed away. Eliza came from the German scholars, the group of Schuchers who had a lot of IP around it. Okay, most of this have expired. So the basic principles are free to use. Now, I also found out that, like pharmaceutical companies like select at Chiron had a patent on which had a generic claim on the, on the sequence of the virus, the preparation, the manufacture of the vaccine, the formulation, the diagnostic reagents. Now, most of this equivalence of this current patent has also lapsed, because of non-payment and other issues. So in the diagnostic part, most of the IP appears to be open, to be used by anybody. Now, having said that, you must also understand that the protocol for diagnosis is getting further modified and optimized, with the main intention to enhance efficacy. And some of such modifications and improvements could be patentable. So there are patents in this area of modification or incremental invention, as we call out, which has been already filed in the patent offices in China, Korea, Australia, Russia, and the European Union, and elsewhere. There are a bunch of patents which have been filed in China by different research institutes from China on the detection, mainly using ELISA, and some also use electrochemical luminescence methods. Coming back to India, we are a little, we should be a little happy because Section 3I of the Indian Patent Act do not allow any diagnostic kit to be patented in India. So whether it's a biochemical assay or any kind of things, no kits are not considered as patentable invention. But however, you should remember, the basic principle, the process can be indirectly patented even in India. Lastly, one must keep into mind that, usually for a patent to come to public domain to get published, it takes, in the usual route, 18 months. So which there is an 18-month of which I would call an uncertainty or a blackout stage. Now, against the entire background of this, one can envisage that, there has been a surge of patent application, which have been filed worldwide and even, continue to be filed for this SARS, COVID-2 detection, drug, vaccine, diagnostic method, treatment, everything, which is still not in public domain.
That's an interesting observation, Dr. Sircar, and I would like to pause you here. Of course, as we speak, a lot of those startups are doing a fabulous job, and I have read the news that a couple of IITs also working to kind of faster the process and getting the results faster. And we don't know as yet, as you mentioned, that whether there has been any patent published, because this is just a few months. Of course, nothing would have come to public's knowledge, but definitely we look forward to seeing some new patents and technology in future.
Now, just one thing I want to add, that was about the diagnostic kits. If you're looking at the vaccine, then CanSino, which is in collaboration with the Academy of Military Science in China, have filed a patent on the vaccine. And surprisingly, it has got a very quick grant. It's a granted patent. It's in public domain. People can access that that document. It's already granted in China. I also know.
Hold on to that. I'll come to that because we have many questions on the vaccines and the patent around that. Okay. We'll come to that. Next question for Ephraim is that we moved from detection to the cure, and when we talk about the cure, it's just a medicine. So around early days when it all came to limelight, there have been a kind of surge of few medicines. From chloroquine to hydroxychloroquine to remdesivir. So these are 3 or 4 major drugs which has been kind of gaining attention around the globe. So my question to you is that what is the progress on this medicine front? Because today everybody is talking about these vaccines. Nobody is kind of highlighting these medicine, what research work is happening, and what are those main drugs being tested and kind of protected around the globe. And so just to kind of why I ask this question in the backdrop of there's a very interesting report by Milken Institute, which says that there are 316 drugs or medical products for treatment, which is in the process of being tested. So there are 316. How many are there, which are protected, and how fast they are progressing?
Okay, well, I would say we started with really, I think at the beginning of the COVID pandemic, we really focused on hydroxychloroquine, which at times at the beginning of the pandemic appeared to have some promising data. Some leaders, including President Trump and President Bolsonaro of Brazil, still think it's promising. President Bolsonaro apparently thinks it cured him from his COVID. Today, remdesivir is commonly thought to be the only effective treatment against COVID, but even remdesivir has not been found to reduce mortality in clinical studies that have been done up to date. The only proven benefit that's been found for remdesivir has been a reduction from 15 to 11 days in patient hospital stays for patients taking remdesivir. The one thing that has showed real promise is the use of plasma from patients that have recovered from COVID, and then taking those patients, their plasma, their antibody, and putting that into patients that are sick with COVID. That has shown promise. It was used in Israel about 2 months ago, and it led to the recovery of several critically ill patients. 3, I think, were reported at the time. I think since then, several more it's also been used in several more cases. The problem with the plasma, use of plasma to treat COVID-19 appears to be that the medical community has not been able to produce the necessary amounts of plasma to be used on a widespread basis. There are difficulties in obtaining sufficient amount of plasma. You have to get people that have recovered, that have sufficient amount of antibodies in their blood. They have to inactivate any other viruses or anything that may be in these patients' blood. For example, if they have hepatitis or HIV or something like that, that would have to be inactivated in order to use it to treat COVID. For the most part, the hydroxychloroquine has been off patent for a very long time. It's unclear the status of the patents of the plasma, though that may be very difficult to patent in many places because it involves direct treatment of the human body. There may be some ways, particularly for the purification and other things, to patent that. I haven't seen any patents come out on that as of yet. Beyond that, we have remdesivir. Remdesivir does have a compound patent family that will expire in 2029. There are specific other later patent families that relate to specific use of remdesivir for the treatment of other viruses, not COVID-19. Some that expire in 2031 and some that expire in 2035. Gilead also attempted to obtain orphan status for remdesivir, but they withdrew their application following the outbreak of COVID. Part of it was a PR thing. You can't really ask for that during this period. Part of it was wasn't really an orphan drug because it was something that was widely needed for treatment of patients. So that's really the status here. There are other drugs, again. We have the repurposed drugs, which again may have some patents on them. And we have the new drugs, which are still in, for the most part, in the blackout period, which Dr. Sircar mentioned. So that's really where we stand with that. We'll talk, I guess, more about that also with regard to vaccines, the patent status of these.
So interestingly, you mentioned Gilead's remdesivir patent, which is in force till 2019. And if you remember, they have very smartly, I don't know whether I can use that word smartly, they have given voluntary license to multiple pharma companies in 3 specific countries, I think 3 or 4 countries, India, Pakistan, and Egypt, to manufacture, produce and manufacture and export to 127 countries. with certain conditions that it would be this license would be valid, either by the time either WHO declares wider COVID-19 free all of us, or there is a cure which is kind of detected and identified. So would you consider this move as a smart move, and what would the repercussions of this voluntary license?
Well, I think that it's a very smart move. Gilead has also done other smart moves similar to that in other countries. For example, in Israel, they donated a stock of remdesivir to the Israeli government for free, without charge. So I think that these moves are very smart. One, because there's a real cost to trying to show that you're trying to profit off of the pandemic. There's a real PR cost for that will be hard for other companies. One place that we saw this was, which we'll mention later, is with Coletra, where they waived their patents and they're not enforcing them. There are some places that have thought that Coletra, a drug which is traditionally used for AIDS, HIV, may be effective against COVID-19. But AbbVie has waived their patents and they're not enforcing them throughout the world. So I think that's a very smart step. I think also steps like voluntary licenses, whether it be for if it's in the area of say respirators, for example, an older respirator that an older model that works, that's good, but not necessarily your top of the line respirator that you're selling now. Great idea to give out the plans for that respirator, give free licenses to build the respirator, because the PR that you get from that far outweighs any costs you might have from giving out these older model respirators that you're doing here to everybody. So I think that as much companies can do what you're talking about, give out the licenses, find ways to limit them to places where they're not necessarily markets that they have high penetration in. Like you're talking about Pakistan, I doubt Gilead has a lot of penetration in Pakistan. In fact, I'm not. So I think that type of thing, particularly if you're talking not in the pharma area where they paper their patents throughout the world, where you can see they'll go into a lot of jurisdictions that no other inventors tend to go into and file the patents. I think that's the case in other areas, particularly where you don't have a patent. If you're in the respirator area and you don't have a patent in Pakistan, giving out your plans in Pakistan, a place you never thought to commercialize, great idea. These are great ideas for companies. If you can get the main commodity that I think companies can get in this period is PR. If you can get the good PR now, then you've built a true asset during this COVID period. If you try to sacrifice that and try and commercialize, then you'll get the bad PR, the bad reputation, and you'll end up hurting yourself during these periods.
Thank you. Dr. Sircar, would you agree with Ephraim, on this point, where this Gilead has given a voluntary license, and you have to look at those conditions the moment, we have any cure. Of course, we don't have, access to those license documents, but what we read in the news is that the moment we have any cure or any vaccine, this would be a kind of, stand terminated. So how would kind of, you deal this move?
See, the thing is, I can't agree more with Ephraim. The situation is something like this. It's a smart and a very tactical move. Okay, and it goes in this way that if you come with a vaccine, you have commercial gains. Okay, if you don't come out with a treatment, then you have an excellent PR done. So in both ways, it's indeed a smart move because you win. If you don't get a treatment which is fully approved, you have an excellent PR done globally. But if for some reason, if this turns out to be the only way to treat this as a therapy, then you have an immense commercial possibility.
Sure. Thanks for being brief on that. Now we're coming to the
if possible, one thing I'd like to add, just to continue with what Dr. Sircar said. the climate now really reminds me of the climate during the late 80s, early 90s regarding HIV. And during that period was the period where nobody thought there would be any treatment. Nobody thought there would be a cure. You got it. It was thought to be, unfortunately, a death sentence. Now we see it's become a chronic disease. You can live 30, 40 years, have a great life, even if you are HIV positive today with the treatments that we have. So I think that the question for COVID and the things with COVID, in the initial period, it's just the PR. That's all you can really get. But when we get beyond this period, when it becomes a chronic problem like HIV, that's when you can really get the commercialization. Until then, to try and do anything will really cause havoc for you. And on the other hand, if you act properly and you don't try and enforce your IP during this initial period, you can really build up your PR.
Sure, makes. Now coming back to the main topic of the vaccines, what we have or what we are seeing, which are under development at different phases. So coming to that point and looking at the observation and referring to these two reports, one by Milken Institute and second by New York Times, which are like actively tracking the development of various vaccines being developed around the globe. So what it says that there are about 213 vaccines in the development phase, and 43 of them are being tested on humans. And there are about 11 vaccines which are at phase 3 trial period. And of course, there are about 4 or 5 of them have got a limited approval to test on those patients in in different countries. So, so Dr. Sircar, I have two questions here. First, of course, I will come to you with the question that which are these major vaccines and how they are kind of progressing. But the first thing is that we talked about generally a vaccine takes 10 plus years to come into a kind of usage. Now they have done in about 8 months time or 10 months time, and their targeted time is about 12 months to 16 months or max 24 months. So looking at that, what are the protocols for approval of these indigenous vaccines or for the vaccines which are done outside India or outside a country and that is brought to a country, and what are the approvals they require before they get kind of required approval?
Well, the rules are by and large very similar in most of the part of the globe. The regulatory bodies approves the medical use of a vaccine or any new drug. But, I should spend a minute on saying what is this clinical trial, which is the data they look at. So we talk about phase 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. Now, what is this phase 1? Phase 1 is a trial run to a very small number of people to test the safety and the dosage. And in this case, to check whether it stimulates an immune response. Then we have the phase 2, which is a little expanded trial, which is done into hundreds of people, and to see that if the vaccine acts any differently from what we have seen in phase 1. And the phase 3 is the most important and the efficacy trial. And in this case, we see that, these vaccines are given to thousands of people, and they're compared with those volunteers who were in placebo. Okay, how much is working? Now, in this specific case, where we are looking at this corona vaccine, the WHO has said that 50% of would be considered as good enough. Now, what's good enough? That means if the phase 3 trial shows 50% recovery for those who have been using this vaccine as compared to placebo, this should be good enough. Now, this is the standard way. Now, we have been, and then the regulators in every country look at these trial results and approve the vaccine. Sometimes they give you an emergency authorization until they give a full approval. This is it. Now, if you want to cut time, you have to cut time in 2 places. Okay. One, reducing the number of participants on which you do the trial. And second, reducing your observation time. Okay. After the patient has been injected with the vaccine. So that's one way we can reduce the time. The other way which has been tried is combining phases. There are quite a few examples, including in India, where the regulatory bodies have given an approval to combine phase 1 and phase 2 and come out with some results where you save a lot of time and number of volunteers. You reduce the number of volunteers. And in the specific case of this corona, we have seen there have been 5 cases where there have been early or limited approval. Now, in these 5 cases, phase 3 trials have not been completed. But the regulators saw the data and gave an approval for limited use. Now, this rushed process, can be seriously risky as well. These 5 vaccines which have been given such an early approval, 4 of them are from China and 1 is from Russia. Now, this comment on clinical trials will, for the sake of completion, is not complete until I say there also exists something which is known as phase 0 and a phase 4. Okay. Phase 0 is when you give a very, very small amount of doses to less than 15 people. That's before you want to see whether it does any harm to human. In this case, this phase 0 has not been used. Then after phase 3, you have phase 4. Phase 4 is post-marketing trial for long-term effects, okay, where the drug is approved and it's been prescribed. The safety and effectiveness of the vaccine is looked into in the phase 4. Now, having said that, before phase 0 or phase 1, there is also a preclinical stage where you test these out on animals, okay, laboratory animals. Now, in this case, we are cutting short time by, in many cases, with no preclinicals. There's been no phase 0, combining phase 1 and phase 2, combining phase 2 and phase 3. And, we are also happy with a lesser number of volunteers being used for the trial and lesser time given for observation on the reactions of the vaccine on the candidates for which trials have been done. So that's how we're trying to judge, and make some savings on the time.
Just a follow-up question, Dr. Sircar, you mentioned that the number of volunteers. Are there any parameters that you have to test on these, specific number of volunteers at different levels?
There is no fixed number for each. See, before you do a trial, you get an approval from the regulatory body. In India, it will be DCGI, the Drug Controller General of India. You submit your regulatory protocols, they approve it. Okay, so it's not, you don't, and there are logistic approvals, there are ethical committee approvals, there are a lot of approvals which are done. So you just can't go to a hospital and pick up a bunch of people and start a trial. You can't do that. So your trial has to be first approved by the regulatory bodies. And that's where you declare what is your plan. And the regulatory bodies, which have expert panels, believe that this can go through. Okay, that's how, the process works. Now, coming back to
that clarifies the question.
Second question is, which are these vaccines? See, I was reading somewhere yesterday that about 226 vaccines are on the run. If you really look at it, there are 42 vaccines which are on human trials right now, and around 93 which you mentioned, which are in preclinical stages. Out of this 42, 5 has got limited or early approval. Now, I mentioned 4 of them are from China. That CanScio Biologicals, which I was mentioning, has a granted patent. They collaborated with the Academy of Military Science, and they are on the late phase 3, and they have got an approval for this. Okay, I have a few of them noted down. You also have Sinovac Biotech from China, which has been approved for limited. Sinopharma, a company which is a pharmaceutical company state-run by China, has 2 vaccines which have been approved, one in collaboration with Wuhan Institute, the other in collaboration with Beijing Institute of Biological Products. Beside these 4, the 5th one is coming from Russia. which is from Gamaleya Research Institute. And they initially named the vaccine GAM COVID vac. They have been used. Used in those regions, those countries, for an early approved use, or without much data in clinical trial. So out of the 11 which are in phase 3, I have mentioned 5 which have been already got approval. The remaining 6, if I want to mention, then you have the collaboration between Moderna Pharmaceutical and National Institute of Health of US, which is working in the late stage of phase 3. They are working on an mRNA-based vaccine. Then there's a collaboration between BioNTech from Germany and Pfizer from US with Fosun Pharma of China. They are also working on a mRNA-based vaccine, BNT162. Johnson & Johnson and Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center of US is the other one which is in the late phase 3. AstraZeneca, using a research output from Oxford University, is in the late phase 3. Novavax from US is also in the phase 3. Now the last one I want to mention is a very interesting one. Okay, it's from Australia, which is in phase 3. It's from Murdoch's Children's Research Institute. They are using this a BCG vaccine, something which was invented in the early 90s, which is more than 100 years old. But they are using this same BCG vaccine, Bacillus calmette guerin vaccine for COVID. Okay. So that makes the ones which are in the late stage running, and we hope some of them, or maybe all of them, will get full approval no sooner than later. Santosh, you had a question.
Yes, just a quick question on that. That Serum Institute from India has been very proactively, talking about how they are going to supply to the whole world. I think they're working with the Oxford University and another vaccine which has come out of India. So would you like to just highlight on that briefly?
See, the vaccine which Serum Institute is using is a product from the University of Oxford. And that, in earlier cases, what we had seen that how to get an approval in a new country. So Indians regulators used to look at approval data in another country. If the vaccine or a drug was approved in another country, then they were required to do a bridge trial in India because of a different ethnicity of the population, the patient population in India. Now, in this case, we do not have any approved vaccine. So a bridge trial just is not enough. So, institute like Serum and all, they are also are going through this phase 2 and phase 3 clinical trials in India. Okay. Now, if you look at Bharat Biotech, the other one, they have developed a vaccine which is in the attenuated form, and with the help of ICMR and National Institute of Virology, they are doing a trial. They are in the very late phase 2 now. Should be starting phase 3 very soon in about multiple centers in India. Dr. Reddy's have collaborated with a Russian firm and are planning to start clinical trial of that Russian molecule. Zydus has come out with another molecule which is also in phase 2 right now, and they're following the protocol of the trials as they has been approved by the regulatory bodies.
Sure.
Now, you mentioned one thing, time is a very essence.
Absolutely.
And I don't want to scare by quoting data. Some of them you have quoted, like HIV, which was identified in 1983. It's close to 39 years. We still do not have a vaccine. Okay, not that, the focus is not there. People are working. And, like the malaria vaccine, okay, although not very commonly used, took about 120 years. The parasite was and the disease was detected in 1897. And, it's just back in 2015 with the first vaccine. So that's where...
I think there's some internet problem with Dr. Sircar. So we'll come back to that. So that was a very elaborate answer, and at least we understand different vaccine and at what stage they are. Now coming to you, Ephraim, and on our next topic, what are the legal provisions? So I will have two questions for you, and I would come to you about the specific question on the compulsory licensing. But the first question would be, of course, considering that how much time these companies or all of us had got to assess what's happening, what is this new virus, and then develop a cure or preventive measures for that. What are those patterns have you seen or come across, or what is available for these products, medicines or vaccine around in Western countries? Is there anything which is in public?
Well, again, we're at the very early stage. We have the blackout stage, which we've mentioned before. So it's very hard to see things. I think the place that we can see kind of things in the vaccine area, and it's also a little difficult to link these things up because you have to work pretty hard for the linkages in the repurposed vaccines. Like we talked about Gilead, which is Dr. Sircar mentioned the BCG vaccine, which was repurposed in Australia. We mentioned before remdesivir, which was repurposed for COVID. So I think in the repurposed area, we can definitely find some vaccines. I also wanted to highlight here the repurposing in also other areas that we have in COVID. For example, I've seen here in Israel, some of our clients have been repurposing their technology. One client, Liposphere, has an innovative inhalation formulation, which they believe will protect lung epithelia better and in the fight against COVID. And so they've repurposed now for their previous invention towards COVID. Another example we have is by Inspira, which is in the artificial respiration area. And so they think that with the respiration needed in COVID, they can provide specific protocols for respiration, which will be helpful. And we've also seen another company, Nishima, which has been developing a technique to bring drugs in a swifter and better manner to the lungs, which is very helpful in COVID. And we've also seen in other indirect areas, a company like CU, which has been developing technologies to make sure that we have the 2-meter distancing between people that we now have to have between everybody everywhere. So I think that when we're talking about patents, whether it be in the vaccine, whether it be in the medicine, whether it be in the other technological areas that are relevant for COVID, whether it be helping treatment, whether it be with the distancing or other things, I think the repurposing of presently patented technology for the fight against COVID is where we're really seeing patents now. If we want to talk about the patents for vaccines and other medicines specifically that are being developed now, we have to wait for the end of that blackout period, really.
Now, coming to the next question is that, there has already been news of multiple countries, at least a handful of them as of now, they have invoked new legal provisions or new legislation to counter or to handle this COVID-19 situation. UK was one of the first one which kind of introduced the Coronavirus Act 2020, and of course it doesn't have mention of the patent. Chile was again one of the first one which introduced new legislation and talked about compulsory license. Israel was one, Ecuador, Canada. So these are the countries have got new legislation to fight that and to kind of enforce compulsory license if there is some new technology or drug comes into picture which could be used to treat this vaccine. So what are the other countries, of course, I would like to hear from you about the Israel compulsory license, how these countries are kind of invoking new laws and compulsory license provision to handle the situation.
Of course. So I think to start with the U.S., I think is the most apt place to start with this. And in the U.S., they have what are called marching rights. This is the primary vehicle in the U.S. for licensing patented or protected drugs. And so this was created during the period of the HIV, which we talked about during the early 90s. And the marching rights basically said that if the U.S. government has provided financial support and given grants towards the development of a drug, then it can march in and give out a license to the drug to other companies. And so this has really come up. This came up a lot during the initial phase. It was talked about, but also recently it started to they've started talking about this again, particularly with regard to Moderna's vaccine. Moderna, there have been questions raised as to whether Moderna in its patents specifically mentioned and disclosed that the research was supported by the U.S. government. And again, this support would allow the U.S. government to march in and offer licenses for Moderna's vaccine. So that to the U.S. Canada, they actually brought back compulsory license powers at the beginning of the pandemic, which had not been in Canadian law at that present time, and they brought them back in. We saw this happen, strengthening of the compulsory licenses in Germany and France as well. And you mentioned Israel, which I think is really been the trailblazer in the compulsory license, which it now gave out the first compulsory license in 20 years. The 20 years really symbolized a big change in Israel's patent regime, where in the past they were giving out compulsory licenses to generic companies like the big Israeli conglomerate Teva for drugs left and right. Here they've stopped them for 20 years, and now they came back with Colectra. And the very interesting thing about Colectra is the reason the compulsory license was given out was to allow Israel to begin importing generic Colectra from India. And what they're basically doing is in Israel, there are several patent families for Colectra. This was a formulation patent family, which had been granted in Israel and many other Western countries. But in India, it had not been granted. And things like this have unfortunately led to India's patent system being often maligned as a weak patent system in the West. But here we see, wartime has come. We have to fight COVID. We're going to use India's patent system to circumvent Israel's own patent system here. So yes, we decided, what?
Not only that, last week our Prime Minister said India is going, of course, India is world's largest vaccine manufacturer, and India is going to supply vaccine to most of the countries, and the most of vaccine would be produced here. So definitely it's not only those patent, but how we are going to help. And don't forget the medicine we already supply to Israel and US and many Western world. So that's the debate here, whether it's a patent right versus the public interest.
Well, I think really the world has to take a rethink its relation to the Indian patent system now. If really you don't want to, in general, we don't want to have a system with exceptions just for difficult times. And India appears to have found a system that doesn't need exceptions for difficult times. We have to think about the other costs. Maybe there's a cost to research and development, to incentivizing research and development and things like that. But I think that now that we've had to experience COVID, I think that we can there's a definite possibility for rebalancing of the patent system throughout the world to find a way that, well, okay, we don't have to find some exemption, compulsory license to take the dust off the law we haven't touched for years, but a way that will incorporate this within the patent system itself. And so I think that really a rethinking really is necessary. Obviously, once we've reached a more balanced time after the pandemic is finished. But to continue with the Israeli compulsory license was really very key with regard to this with regard to the relation of pharma companies to patents and their enforcement. After Israel issued its compulsory license for Colectra, AbbVie decided to waive enforcement of its patents throughout the world with regard to COVID for Colectra. So I think that this is a very key thing, and we saw this shift. And this also led to a shift in other companies. For example, we saw with Medtronic, which makes ventilators, and respirators. We saw older models they're giving out free use. This was an attempt at that time. There were talks about compulsory licenses for ventilators and respirators. And in order to head off the compulsory license, which is usually something very drastic and all-encompassing, well, okay, we'll give an older model that works, that can help in this pandemic, and we won't expose ourselves to compulsory license. We'll get that PR benefit, and we'll be able to retain for a later date the things that we can better commercialize in the future after the end of the pandemic.
Sure. So we are kind of almost have run out of time. We have a couple of more questions. If we can briefly touch upon those. So Dr. Sircar, coming back to you, looking at the compulsory license and other provisions in India. And of course, 2012 was the first time when the compulsory license was actually tested, when in case of Bayer versus Natco. After that, there was another case which kind of didn't materialize. So looking at that, do you think the existing legislation, what we have under the patents section 84 or 92 would suffice, or other provisions would also come into picture, or government has to intervene to handle the situation?
Well, I think, we are very well placed off. And the Patent Act 1970, it has all the provisions. And not only compulsory licensing. So if you look at compulsory licensing, you mentioned of section 84 and 92. 84, I don't see much of 84 coming in, because 84 is for any interested party. If there is, if the reasonable requirement is not filled in the market, and there is, the invention is not worked, section 84 comes in only after 3 years of grant of patent. But if you look at section 92, the central government, in situations of national emergency or in extreme urgency, can go ahead and issue compulsory licenses for any patents. And all they have to do is a notification in the official gazette. And to add to that, it's not only compulsory licensing. We have provisions like section 47 and section 100. So section 47 even allows the government to import patented stuff and manufacture them for the purpose of their own distribution system.
I agree. Dr. Sircar, would you also want to touch upon and see that if there is any provision under other three, legislation what we have? Of course, National Pharma Pricing Authority, which fixes that pharma.
That is a different issue. But
that is definitely right.
I'll mention about that as well. But
Sure.
Section 100 also gives the central power government to any time, whether the patent is pending or granted, to use it. Now, when you're coming out drug price, that's the pricing. That's a different issue. If the prices are not affordable, see, the earlier rights were for accessibility. Is it available? Now the price is high or low. Now we have a very good system. We have the DPCO, Drug Price Control Order, which actually came out from Section 3 of the Essential Commodities Act. And their job is to ensure that drugs are available at affordable price. Then you mentioned about NPPA, which is the National Pharmaceutical Pricing Authority. Now, their job is to look at the fixing price, revision of price and of all pharma products. Okay, then we have the pharma pricing policy of 2012. We have the list of essential medicines of 2011. So pricing is not really a big issue, and we have seen instances in the not very long ago, we saw those DES is that drug-eluting stents, how their prices have been slashed. We saw in the last 1 year how the prices of all prosthetics used in orthopedic operations, they were slashed. And NPPA has done a good job. And I have full confidence that if pricing becomes an issue, we have bodies like DPCO and NPPA to really look and address to that. I don't think that will be a big challenge.
Okay, so we don't have to worry from public point of view that the pricing would be a factor here to worry about, and there are enough legislation in India, already. We don't have to bring in new one. And of course, not to mention the Epidemic Act and National Disaster Management Act, which was again, invoked early May or June. I'm sure that has nothing to do with the patent, but definitely whether this has any role to play in handling the COVID.
Their main role will be, mask and 2 gaj ki duri. 6 feet distance and mask, which is actually a criminal offense now. You can have to pay a penalty of 500 rupees in most metropolitan city if you are not wearing a mask. But So that's where the disaster handling thing comes in this COVID situation.
Sure. Now, of course, we talked about from public point of view. If we have to, represent the pharma companies, and of course, this is very important that if we have to advise them, we have to make sure that their interest is protected. So, what would be kind of your advice if they have to protect their interest, they have to continue the research and development, and they have to continue protecting their intellectual property, and after that, how they should go about it, enforcing that. So Dr. Sircar, coming to you again, and that what would be your kind of advice to these pharma companies?
My 2 cents onto this is that if there is something patentable, please patent it, and later on we can see on the enforceability and the licensing ability of the patent. But my strong point is here is my request to all parties who are involved in this corona pandemic, starting from funding agencies, the physicians, the virologists, the epidemiologists, and of course, the IVD manufacturers, that a few cost savings of a few cents do not justify a rarest, potential unreliability. So it's not saving a few more cents, when it comes to unreliability of that, inaccurate immunodiagnostic tests or even inaccurate thing will have to be a heavy price. And I'm sure the regulators are there to look into this. And like many of us, I'm also hopeful that sooner than later we'll all become more and more comfortable and with a drug and a vaccine approved for full use.
Sure. Ephraim, your brief comment, from pharma, you represent multiple pharma companies. So you are advisor to them. What would be your advice if, kind of we can scare them with the compulsory license and other legislation? How would you advise your clients?
Well, I mean, I think also I saw in one, just to broaden a little bit the question, I also saw one of the questions here mentioned the dilemma. Okay, well, we're going to put all this, we're a pharma company, we're going to invest all these resources and money in it. Then we're going to get hit with a compulsory license, and we're going to end up not making either breaking even or not even making back the research and development money we put into finding the vaccine or medicine for COVID. So first, what I would say to that is it's very important if you're a pharma company to be proactive. You do not want to get hit with a compulsory license that you don't have control over. You have to be in contact. If you have a potential drug or vaccine, you need to be in contact with the different agencies that they have in the government, whether it be the FDA or the patent office or a combination in various areas, to make sure that you're able to offer a minimal compulsory license that satisfies restricted just for COVID, not for all things. If, for example, you're like Coletra, you treat also HIV, make sure that the compulsory license is just restricted to Coletra for use in the treatment of COVID, not getting it out there also for HIV. Another thing that I think is very important for pharma companies and governments is to begin pushing for a new type of incentive scheme for innovations in the COVID area. And I think that would look something like the orphan drug scheme that you have in America now, which would be grants on the front end, not really being able to enforce your patent, not really being able to make a lot during the pandemic itself, and then giving you a level of additional market exclusivity on the back end. So we're going to incentivize you with the grants. We're going to provide the public with the drug when they need it during the pandemic. But then on the back end, we're going to give you some more. We're going to give you that additional market exclusivity so you can make back the money and the investment that you put into this that you had during the period that you weren't able to do that during the pandemic itself. So I think that's really very important. I think it's also important.
Thanks for taking that question. And in fact, that was a very kind of important question. And do you want to add something else to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to add something. I think that pharma companies really need to follow the HIV model. Following the HIV model in how you deal with use of corona is very important. Giving access programs in low-income areas in first world countries, giving access in in lesser economically developing countries for low cost. Using that HIV model is what will help pharma companies navigate through this area. It's not something that hasn't been faced before. HIV in the 80s and 90s was just like it, and they can use that model now to make sure that they're able to, on one hand, reap all the benefits, whether it be PR, whether it be the making money from drugs, that they can do for COVID as well. And if you look, a company that did that really well is Gilead. Gilead built itself on making drugs for the treatment of HIV. And if you're a smart pharma company, you can build yourself now making drugs for COVID, build up your PR, build up your stock of drugs, and eventually they will become money makers after the pandemic as well, just like Gilead did with HIV.
So that's what I wanted to kind of conclude, that you were saying, all the pharma companies should follow Gilead's, the system, what they have done that. So that's a very interesting way to put that forward. And I completely agree, as these companies are working towards development of the vaccine and cure. And of course, they can't fear of a compulsory license. And even if the countries, they haven't invoked, including India, haven't invoked. And there was a question which Dr. Sircar tried to answer that. I'm not sure, Dr. Sircar, you want to quickly respond to that? Whether is there a need to kind of invoke this compulsory license provision like Israel or some other countries have done, or we don't need to?
See, it all depends on $1 million question. Has that key patent been filed in India? All this comes much after that. Okay, and has that key patent which claims that magic dose filed in India? If it has been, then such things are important.
So you're saying since we don't have any patent yet, we don't have to kind of react now.
No, another thing I'm saying that our Patent Act, our pricing acts, legislations are well in place to handle those situations in an overnight fashion. Should there be a need or an emergency, the statutes are there. Central government can just issue a notification in the official gazette, and from next day morning it's done.
I agree. And also considering how the Patent Act or the Patent Office has been acting, they've been granting patent within a year in India. And hopefully we'll get to see more patents, and these companies would not shy away from not protecting these. So last question for both of you, any last point you would like to mention, keeping the entire discussion, all the issues, 4-5 topics we touched upon. What is your last point for pharma companies and also for the people that, who's looking forward for this vaccine and medicine?
Well, for the pharma companies, as I would say, there's nothing to shy away. You go ahead with your research, and you find something patentable, go ahead and patent it. Okay, and then we'll see. And as Ephraim pointed out, keep in the contact with the right agencies should there be a requirement. And for the public, I don't think there is in India there is any need of a panic. Should there be a patent also existing for the magic dose? We have enough legislation in place that public interest will definitely overpower the patent right.
Sure. Ephraim?
Well, I would say, first of all, regarding the patents, recently the head of the USPTO has said he doesn't think that patents will be a barrier. And in truth, I think that probably will be the case because of what we've seen with Coletra now. The risk of getting a compulsory license is too much for a drug company. The risk of the bad PR is too much. And I think also when you talk about the dilemma we talked about before, there is a lot of positive in that PR, and there's a lot of positive in building yourself up as the maker of the vaccine for COVID-19. You can build yourself up just like Gilead did with HIV. And for pharma companies and for governments, I think that finding a new system, like I mentioned, that's similar to the orphan drug system with grants on the front end and market exclusivity on the back end, that's very key. And I think whether countries or pharma companies, follow your HIV blueprint. What you followed then, what worked for you, what got you through then, what allowed you to thrive in that area, that's what will lead you forward. And if you don't as a company have that, follow what Gilead did during that period. And I really think that if you do that, then you will come out of this as a pharma company successful. The public will have the magic dose that they need, and governments that act in this manner will be viewed as responsible governments that have been able to tackle COVID.
I think that would be a really morale booster for pharma companies if there was some kind of a concern of them losing IP or not protecting. So they would definitely, go forward and continue to protect their IP. And with that, I think I don't have much to add on to this. Of course, this is a very vast topic, and 1 hour was not enough. And of course, we have already 15 minutes. More to that. So with that, I would like to thank both the panelists, Ephraim and Dr. Sircar, for taking time out and coming and discussing this one. It's a very interesting discussion, and it has kind of given a lot of insight to the people working in the pharma companies, and also to the lawyers, not only from the pharma point, but also law point of view. Also, last but not the least, all the participants who came and joined us and participated in the discussion. So thank you very much, and I look forward to continue this discussion offline. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Have a nice evening.
Yeah, you too.